It is really an honor for me to have a chance to introduce Sister Helen Prejean. She, depending on how you count it, for the last 25 years has been tirelessly, and I can testify to that having spent some time with her today, championing, or let me put it a different way, asking us all as a community to think about how we respond to situations in which wrong has been done. When harm has been done one person to another, how do we respond to that? And particularly when the wrong is very serious. All day I've been thinking about this term, the death penalty, and I can't help having a problem with that word penalty, as if it were a game. It's a punishment. It's a death punishment. And Sister Helen is asking us to think about, is that the way we want to respond when hurt happens? Is punishment, and even sometimes revenge, the most helpful way for us as a community and for individuals and for all those involved to respond? And in that way, she's done us a tremendous service. When her book came out, I think in 1994, 93, it changed the nature of the conversation in the country about the death penalty. And she continues to do that with her new book, Death of Innocence, which I read some of which I read some today, and it was just a tremendous book. I highly recommend it. The conflict resolution field operates in many different realms of our lives, of our social lives. One of those has to do with the justice system. And the term restorative justice, which is attached to this whole question of how we respond to harm between people, provides an alternative to what's called commonly the retributive justice system that is based on punishment. And in that way, the death punishment is the most extreme of that retributive justice system, at the pinnacle, if that would be the suitable word to use in such a context. So again, Sister Helen is asking us to think about, how do we want that as a part of our community? She has been, she's accompanied six individuals to their death. She's been counseling death row inmates since 1981. She also works with murder victims' families. I think that's really important to understand and to know. She founded a group in New Orleans called Survive and is an honorary member of Murder Victims for Reconciliation. She holds 37 honorary degrees. It's not the most important part of her resume, but she's an honorary chairperson of Hands Off Cain, an international group based in Rome working for the abolition of the death penalty, and served as a board member on that, with that group, and is also a founder of the moratorium campaign in this country that seeks to create a moratorium both state by state and nationally. After her talk, there will be some time for question and answer, and there will also be book signing. So if you haven't bought a book and would like her to sign it, you can out front, and we'll do the book signing somewhere around here. Without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome Sister Helen Prejean.
Thank you. Thank you. To all the people in the outer room, we are with you. Before I begin, I just want to call your attention. There's a little paper outside. There's this incredible family. Tairu Furukawa was a Buddhist priest. He was visiting people on death row in Japan, which has a terrible death penalty. It's totally up to the Minister of Justice, and who decides you might be the last one on death row, and if the Minister of Justice decides you die, person comes to your cell, you might be the last one there, take you out, hang you. Within a couple of weeks, your parents get a letter saying the separation has happened. It's a terribly cruel place. It's removed completely. People can't visit. It's really, really. Here's this Buddhist priest who's following the Buddhist principles, and he meets two people on death row that he becomes convinced are innocent. Mr. Ishii and Mr. Nishi. I don't know their last Japanese names. And he gets involved, not only him, his wife Michiko had come from wealth. Her family wealth was used for 40 years. This little family went across Japan to call attention to the death penalty in Japan and to try to free these two men. Reverend Furukawa, who was not a lawyer, did the investigation of the case and wrote up it was the first time the Supreme Court in Japan ever overturned a death sentence. Saved the life of one of the men, gradually released him, and then summarily executed the other. This paper here is for you to sign. They're gathering signatures from all over the world to bring to the Supreme Court of Japan to say they want to do a posthumous trial, retrial, to vindicate Mr. Nishi that in fact he was innocent and Japan killed an innocent man. You can imagine how uphill that is. Reverend Furukawa was also a poet. He has a beautiful poem. I have little straw sandals. When you do pilgrimage in Japan, you wear straw sandals, whether it's in snow or summer. And I have straw sandals. And his poem was, I cannot take off my straw sandals. Means I can't stop searching for justice and trying to help justice because I know the truth and I need to bring the truth to the Japanese people. So there's a little table out there and a great guy named Wally. Where are you, Wally? By the door there. And Wally will help you put your signature on there to help justice to come in Japan. I was at a conference where one of the lawyers who worked with people on death row in Japan, when the person comes, every day could be the day of your death. And there's a certain person who comes to deliver the news. You come with me to go be taken to be hanged. And he always would come by 10 in the morning. So everybody wakes up in the morning, everybody's tense. It might be my day. By 10 o'clock, if the person hasn't come, things relax a little bit more relaxed for lunch, the afternoon, and you pray that the night never ends. Because when you wake up in the morning, you face it again. And looking at the death penalty, when you condemn to death a conscious, imaginative human being, is there a way you can do that without torture? What defines torture? And the UN Convention Against Torture, which we signed as the United States, and Amnesty International defines torture as an extreme physical or mental assault on someone who's been rendered defenseless. So you sit in a cell. The cells on death row in the United States, by the way, are 1 foot smaller than the cells in Abu Ghraib were. In something equivalent to a small bathroom, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, Joseph Odell, who's the second story in Death of Innocence, watched as 20 men were led in front of his cell to be killed ahead of him. And you wait for everyone on death row that I know has the same nightmare. You can control your conscious thoughts. You can't control your dreams. It's time. They're coming for me. They're coming to my cell. They're dragging me out. And I'm fighting. And I'm going, no, I don't want to die, no. And then all of a sudden I wake up and I'm sweating. And I look around and I'm in my cell. And it was a dream. Patrick Saunier, the first person I accompanied to execution, when he was brought to the death house 3 days before he was killed, he just took little short naps. He didn't want to go to sleep because he couldn't control the dreams, couldn't control the nightmare. Are we torturing people in the United States? Do you know our Supreme Court refuses to acknowledge any form of torture and says in the Gregg decision, when they put it back, that even though we have the alternative of a life sentence for this crime, it is not against the dignity of the human person to execute them. They say that. They say it in the court decision. Not against human dignity to render a person defenseless and take them out and kill them. Because, of course, what are they thinking of? They're identifying the crime. Justice Scalia, whom I take on seriously in the second half of Death of Innocence, and the Machinery of Death chapter said, death by lethal injection, what an enviable death, next to what they did to their victims. What does that mean for a Supreme Court justice to call the death of a human being an enviable death? Let me tell you about the journey. I didn't start out being a death penalty nun. If you Google me up, death penalty nun, that's me. My name is going to come up. You know, you start out, you're a nun, you can teach kids, you know, religion and English. You start out like a normal nun, and sometimes the media would ask me in the beginning when the movie came out and everything, you know, and people would just go, hey, what made you go to death row, you know? And I said, you know, I got involved with poor people, you know, the upward mobility of the gospel. And they didn't get it, and some of you don't either. But, you know, Jesus was always with poor people and the voiceless people and the, you know, people considered scum. And it was all an unfolding. And maybe that's a gift. Because I didn't always understand the death penalty, I went through my high school and college years, never thought about it and supported it. The traditional Catholic teaching, like many Christian churches, was to uphold the death penalty. It's been a recent development in moral teaching for us to take a principled position against the death penalty. And some of my most interesting moments when I became aware, when I began accompanying people to execution, we began to do campaigns in Louisiana against the death penalty, was our beloved Archbishop Philip M. Hannon, who had been the only bishop or one of the only bishops to oppose the whole thing on nuclear war, and because he had been in the military. And I'm going, Archbishop Hannon. He said, well, sister, we have to protect ourselves against terrorists. This is before 9/11 now. This is in the 80s. I'm going, Archbishop, we don't have any terrorists on death row in Louisiana. We got poor black people. We got people who are, and it was so interesting because he upheld the theory of the death penalty, but he didn't want to kill real people. So whenever somebody was up for death, I'd say, Archbishop, would you write to the clemency board? Archbishop, would you please call the governor? And he would. But he wanted to uphold, what is it? Is it upholding the idea of the death penalty, that we need to have it as that ultimate deterrence or something? So it's been an ongoing dialogue with the hierarchy of my church about the death penalty, and I'll tell you a little bit, because finally you just hang in there, and every now and then you get a little breakthrough, you know, like having a dialogue with the Pope or something, you know, which is in the second book. But you just start out and you're learning. And I can tell you directly that I would never have gotten involved with the death penalty if I had not gotten involved with poor people. Because when I came to understand about the gospel of Jesus and what was bubbling up from the Latin American Church of Liberation Theology, anybody can go to people and preach about the love of God. God loves you. And their children are dying before they're 5 and they don't have health care and they don't have literacy. And 90% of the wealth of a country is controlled by 10 or 11 families in Latin America, and their children are starving. And people are dying young because the average age is about 40 because they're overworked and they don't have health care and they're dying. And then we go to them and we preach, God loves you. What does that mean? And actually, the more I find out about Jesus, I realize there's a reason that Jesus got crucified as a troublemaker. Same reason Martin Luther King was killed, same reason Gandhi was killed. It was the community Jesus inaugurated that really got the anger of the temple cult, the religious hierarchy, as well as the Romans against it. A community so radical that everybody was treated with respect and nobody was in need. There was a radical sharing of goods. Nobody was rich, nobody was poor, they shared. And we did that for 300 years in the following of Jesus. And I gradually come to understand, I don't even know any poor people. I mean, we had 10 major housing projects in New Orleans. I'm living in the suburbs of New Orleans. I'd never been to one of them. Half of our city living in poverty. How did we have an evacuation plan for the city in Hurricane Katrina that did not include over 100,000 people that didn't have cars? How did that happen? How could that happen in a major city? By the way, we just had the president do the State of the Union, not mentioning Katrina in the State of the Union. Rollo May used to say the opposite of love is not hate, it's ignoring people. Our poor people in our inner cities, there's more than one way to drown. A hurricane isn't the only way you drown. Poverty kills you. It kills you. Gandhi used to say that. More people die from poverty than die from bullets. So why wasn't there a plan to include poor people in the cities? Because there's never been a plan to include poor people. It's not a plan to include good public education for people who are coming into our adult learning center at Hope House in St. Thomas. And 11th grade, when'd you drop out? 11th grade. Oh, okay, well, look, one more year. It's not going to be hard to get your GED. And they can't read a third grade reader, and they're going to graduate from the public school in a year. They can't read. How do we let public schools that were not teaching kids, because it's all poor black kids that go to the public schools, and the leaders send their kids to the private schools, so we got a two-class system of education. And I was part of that upper class. I was part of the kids that went to private schools, Catholic schools, where I learned to read and critique, and where I learned to write so I could write books, where I learned to do public speaking by the time I was a senior in high school, so I can get before people and just talk like you're just talking to people without being nervous and what am I going to say, and I'd be dead if I hadn't done that. But you begin to have a sense of who you are. I mean, all the students who go to this school, to come to a great university like this, you're learning who you are, and you're learning what your gifts are, and you're honing your skills so that one day when you hit the fire and that call comes to you, you write a book, you're in this. You got to tell the story. You put a face on these people to help people to understand. The gifts well up inside you, and they sit like seeds inside of us when we get an education, and then we begin to use them as we begin to live out our vocation in life. And for me, once I came to understand Jesus was on the side of the poor, and I'm like the little girl that wrote that essay one time called A Poor Family. She said once there was a very poor family. Mother was poor, father was poor, the children were poor. The butler was poor, the chauffeur was poor, the gardener was poor. The whole family was very poor. And of course you write essays like that when you don't know real people, and there poor people were right at my doorstep. So when I traveled into the St. Thomas housing projects to live among the neighborhood residents there as their neighbor, I traveled geographically maybe a 16th of a mile, but spiritually I traveled a galaxy. And Sister Laurie Schaff, you always learn when you go to begin to do the works of justice, people are always there ahead of us. We're always standing on other people's shoulders. Sister Laurie Schaff says, look, Helen, you don't have to have a blueprint in your back pocket about what to do about poverty. Just live among the people and be neighbor to them. And then you'll know what you need to do. And it's while I was there, one day coming out of that adult learning center, that a friend sees me. And he worked in the prison coalition office. And he sees me and he says, hey, Sister Ellen, you want to be a pen pal somebody on death row here in Louisiana? I said, yeah, sure, I could do that. I could write some nice letters. I was on my English major. It was 1982. We hadn't executed anybody in 20 years. There had been an unofficial moratorium on the death penalty in the whole United States, including Louisiana and the southern states. Nobody was doing it. We thought it was over. I write the man a letter. Paused when I addressed the envelope. I never in my life wrote a letter to somebody. Death row. I mean, that's depressing to get mail. You look at your address on Waiting to Die Street. I went, whoa, what is that like? Worse, Waiting to be Killed Street. You know what the problem was? He rode back, and there was an encounter. And when there is an encounter between two real people, anything can happen then. And then it all unfolded like the petals of a rose. It was not this big dramatic thing. He had no one to visit him. He was alone. And it was his simple humanness and aloneness and abandonment. And so I wrote, I just said, I'll come see you sometime. I'm not changing my whole ministry. I'm staying in my work at the adult education at Hope House, helping people, try to help people get jobs. And, well, he's so excited in return mail. I get this whole visitor form, and it was so simple. He says, look, I'm a Catholic. You're a nun. Would you be my spiritual advisor? I go, yeah, fill in the paper. Yeah, I've got no felonies. Yeah, I'm a good nun. Yeah. And I don't know that 2.5 years later, at midnight, they are going to electrocute him to death in the electric chair at midnight. And everyone is going to have to leave the death house at 5:45 except the spiritual advisor, who will be me. And that I will walk with him and say to him, Pat, when they do this, look at my face. And I'll be the face of Christ for you. I'll be the face of love for you. This is kind of Catholic talk, but it's called grace. It's not just Catholics. It just means we have the strength we need when we need it. I didn't have it ahead of time. I could never have said yes if I'd known. This is what it's going to mean now. You're going to write letters to this man. He's going to write back. You're going to visit. Then they're going to kill him. You're going to be there. No, I couldn't do that. Nobody could do that. But it's that spirituality in every tradition of living in the present moment and learning to do the deeds of love that are asked of us in the present moment. And so I followed the path. In Latin America, they say the path is made by walking. And so you begin to take the step, and then the next step unfolds. And in the process, and that's the journey in Dead Man Walking, I take you with me. I'd never written a book before, and wonderful resources come to help us. Goethe said that. He said, when we are engaged in a noble cause and unswerving in our commitment, providence moves for us and resources make their way to us. Do I think I'm going to write a book? Of course not. Do I think I'm going to accompany 6 human beings and watch them be killed? Of course not. But when the white-hot fire hit and then the call was there, here come these resources. First, a literary agent in New York, Bill McKibben. He says, look, write my friend Gloria Loomis. Maybe she'll be your agent. I heard it was hard to get a literary agent. With the Masters in Fine Arts, we got a lot of writers. It used to be like Hemingway. You worked on a newspaper. Then you went and became a writer. Now you can get a master's in writing, and we got a lot of them. And it's hard to get a literary agent. Boom. There she was. Yeah, I'll be your literary agent. I barely opened the door. Boom. There they were. All the resources right there. And then a wonderful editor, Jason Epstein, who helped me shape the journey in the book, Dead Man Walking. If I hadn't had him, I wouldn't be here. There'd have been this little book out by this Roman Catholic nun on the death penalty, and it would have been, it never would have gone anywhere probably. Because see, Jason, who's this wonderful editor and knew how to shape story, says to me, Helen, now you are the spiritual advisor of this man, so people aren't going to trust you. You're a nun. They're going to think you're overly sympathetic to this murderer. Said, if you don't talk about the crime in the first 10 pages of this book, your book's going to fail. In fact, if you let the tension drop on any page in this book of the horror of the crime this man did, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, and then on the other hand, the increasing horror of what it is to be there with someone as the state is taking them step by step and killing them, your book will fail. And so I wrote that book in that tension. But first I lived it and still live it. I accompany 2 people today now, a man on death row, Manuel Ortiz, who's innocent. He's the 7th. He's the 3rd out of the 7 that I believe is innocent. That just shows how fluky the thing is and how broken it is, because people are poor in the South and they get poor defense and truth doesn't come out at trial, period. That's a structural reason why we have so many mistakes right there. But it all unfolded so naturally. It was like one step and then another. It was like, well, I'll go visit him, and so I take you with me. Some people said to me, did you read Truman Capote's In Cold Blood before you wrote Dead Man Walking? Because, he was the first to use like the elements of fiction in writing nonfiction. But I just wrote naturally. Instinctively, I did it in first person, and I take you there with me. As I'm going on to death row and I'm scared, as the guards bring him in, they lock me in a room, and then I'm nervous about him, and then I look at his face through that heavy metal screen dividing us, and I'm shocked at his face because I couldn't believe how human he looked. I guess in the back of my mind, I thought he would look different. He had murdered somebody. I'd never been with a murderer. His face is going to somehow look different. It's going to look mean, and then the visit, and then the realizing he had a brother who was serving 2 life sentences for the same murder. First, legal question. How can you have a murder and one brother gets death and one brother gets life for the same murder? How does that happen? I don't know. I don't know the answer. Didn't pursue any of the legal questions at first with Pat. Neither did he. There are some people on death row who just completely leave it up to their lawyers. They never ask questions. They never follow their case. When Millard Farmer came on the case, when finally we realized Pat was in trouble because I didn't know how the courts worked, and he worked desperately, came from Atlanta to try to save Pat's life, then I began to learn about how the courts work and how if you don't get your stuff out at trial, and if there are not formal objections raised by your attorney when the jury's seated or when things are presented, the appeals courts won't look at it later. They said, well, your attorney was supposed to raise an objection. He said, but I had a crummy attorney. He didn't raise anything. Well, it's not a perfect attorney, but we're not going to call it, against your constitutional rights. And that has been going on. So finally, with the Calvin Burdine case, maybe if y'all follow this at all, finally when a lawyer went to sleep during his client's trial, I went, maybe that's ineffective. But even then, some members of the Fifth Circuit panel were talking about it and said, well, maybe he was sleeping during the boring parts of the trial. I don't know if we call that ineffective. Everything was passing because it was impossible to prove ineffectiveness of counsel. I'm going to learn all those issues. And in Death of Innocence, I really descend into them. But Pat was the first, and we visited, and I recognized his humanness. It's just really basically that simple. He was a human being, and he deserved not to be tortured and killed. And then I found out about the crime. And when I found out about the crime, everything changes inside you because you put yourself in this permanent tension. Because, of course, I don't want the state of Louisiana to execute Patrick Soniak. This man's a living human being. And he has done something unspeakably wrong, but he's more than that one act of his life. That's not his essence. And then going over to the Prison Coalition office, I asked one day, could I have some background on the Soniak case? They say sure, and they bring out all these bland-looking manila folders with the information inside. They look like so bland on the outside, and you open it up, and there are the faces of these two beautiful teenage kids. David LeBlanc, 17 years old, Loretta Bork, 18 years old, their prom picture on the front page of the Daily Iberian, this little Cajun town in Louisiana. And next to their smiling faces is a huge, bold headline, Teenagers Found Murdered. And I read the story, how the two men that I'm visiting, Pat and his brother Eddie, on a November night, these kids had been to a homecoming football game and afterwards went to this Lover's Lane, an abandoned place near a sugarcane field, to park. And the two brothers and 5 other teenage kids came forward that they had done this to them. Nobody had been killed, but some of the girls had been raped. And they'd approached the car, they had guns, and they claimed to be security guards and said to the kids, you're trespassing, this is private property. And we're going to need to take you to the owners. Do your parents know where you are? They're going to be very upset with you. Well, look, tell you what, if the girl has sex with us, we won't bring you to the owners, which is rape. And they have guns, aggravated rape. And this night, just as unspeakable as that is, these 2 children are found lying face down near that sugarcane field, and they've both been shot in the back of the head. And I read this, and now I know what they did. The first ripple through me is, of course, as each of us hears this for the first time tonight, is just complete and total outrage that this should happen to innocent human beings, young people who are just beginning their lives, and they have been brutally killed. And the outrage is one of the key parts of the spiritual journey as a people we really need to deal with. Our culture, the American culture, very easily translates that to, well, look, let's talk about equal justice now. If they kill, they deserve to die. They didn't respect the human rights of their victims. They killed them. Why should they live? One victim's family said to me, my daughter's dead. I cannot bear the thought that every day he'd wake up and he can call his mother and he can celebrate his birthday and he can read books and he can have friends and he's alive and she's dead, and that's not fair. That the only thing she said that could satisfy her was for him to be dead too. Who does not understand that if we went through that that's the way we'd feel? And over these years, all the victims' families, I've come to know it's a starting place of everybody. I have never met a person who lost a loved one to murder and always starts off with, well, I belong to Amnesty International. In principle, I'm against it. And now people have to work it through. Some work it through relatively quickly, but everybody's got to deal with it. And I did too. And the ripple then I felt right on the heels of the outrage was guilt. Like, I'm the spiritual advisor to these two people who killed these two kids. What am I doing? I'd never done this before. Like, I'm consorting with the enemy. I'm comforting them. But then, boy, that strong rock thing in your soul goes, wait, they have a human dignity. And so, you believe they ought to be executed? No, I knew that. But, just going through this and then thinking of the victims' families, the parents, I had this nudge. I had this kind of hunch. I ought to go see those poor parents. Everybody was Catholic in this, by the way. The Bork family who lost their daughter, the LeBlancs who lost their son, the Sauniers were Catholics, had grown up Catholic, me. And there was that, I ought to go see them. Every parent's worst nightmare. And then I hold back and I go, they're not going to want to see me. I mean, I'm the spiritual advisor of the one who killed their kids. They're going to be furious. They're not going to. And I stayed away from them. It was a terrible mistake. I didn't do anything. I didn't call them. I didn't write them. The simplest note, I am so sorry about your son. I am so sorry about your daughter. I have never experienced what you have experienced. I don't have children. I'm a nun. I don't have children, but I just want to say I'm praying for you, and I'm so sorry about your child. I didn't do anything. And I met them at the worst possible time you could meet a victim's family, because it was at the public pardon board hearing, and it was, you sign a book when you go in what side you're on. It's the closest we could come in modern society to being in a Roman amphitheater where you put your thumb up if you wanted somebody to live or your thumb down if you wanted them to die. And you do that by signing a book when you come in. What side you on? You're on the side of the state, wants to carry out the execution, sign this side. Sometimes they sit people in a room in different colored chairs. Death and life. Clemency on this side. On the side of the defendant, 3 of us. The lawyer, Millard Farmer, Brad Fisher, psychiatrist, and me. Everyone else in the room was there to support the victims' families who at last were going to get their justice that had been promised them. And that was when I met the parents. How could they not but see me as an enemy? And the Bork family, when we ran into each other, looked at me, and their anger was so profound. They averted their eyes, and they just walked by me in silence. I deserved it. And right behind them were the LeBlancs, Lloyd LeBlanc, his wife Eula. They had lost their only son, David. Later I learned, Lloyd LeBlanc told me, sister, when they killed our boy, our family name died. And he walked right up to me. And inside, I prepared myself for their anger, their rejection, which I deserved, and surprise. Human beings have a way of popping out of the box. Have you noticed? And he walked right up to me. He said, sister, this is my wife, Eula. I'm Lloyd LeBlanc. It's our son, David, who was killed. He said, sister, all this time you've been visiting with these 2 brothers, you never once came to see us. You can't believe the pressure we're under with the death penalty. And I'm shocked that he says that, about it being a pressure. I thought all victims' families would want this. Isn't that what we tell them as a society? This is the way we're going to honor your dead child. This is how you get your justice. And he's saying we're under pressure. What did that mean? 10 minutes earlier, he had been the one to stand up when the pardon board said, and what are the wishes of the victim's family? He had stood up for both families and said, it's our desire that the execution proceed. And he's looking in my eyes 10 minutes after that, and he's saying, where have you been? We had nobody to talk to. And then when he explained it to me, why he was the one to stand up, it's because Mr. Bork had said to him, Lloyd, you got to do this, because you can be calmer than me, and I might lose it emotionally, and it might work against us. So what is he going to do? Say to the father, they're grieving the loss of Loretta, their daughter. Say, no, I'm not standing up. I'm against the death penalty. He didn't have either the courage or the stamina or anything. And of course he had no support. So he stood up and his voice was in there. Yes, let the execution proceed. And then he's looking in my eyes saying, "Sister, where were you?" And he is the gracious one. He's the hero of Dead Man Walking. I'm not the hero. I'm the storyteller. He took me by the hand. He said, "Sister, come pray with me. I pray in this little chapel. Come pray with me. Come meet us. Come see what we're going through in this." And it's because of his graciousness then that I went and I began to learn. From Lloyd DeBlanc, I end the book with him, was the first victim's family I met where he lost his child, the child who was so like him, who was mechanically inclined like Lloyd, he could fix anything. All the kids in the school that David went to school, when the sheriff's deputies went to try to interview the kids about who would have wanted to kill David LeBlanc, none of them. I mean, he was one of those loving, beautiful kids. Even the kindergarten kids in the school said David played on the merry-go-round with them. And he said to me, as I knelt by him, I realized as we were praying together, and notice it's the way the film Dead Man Walking ends, it's the way the play that Tim has done for university students to do. It ends in prayer because you got to take it to a deeper place. We are not going to figure this out with logic or just purely philosophically or whatever. And as he brought me through it, I realized when we were praying together that he was actually praying for everyone. Of course for David, of course for his wife who almost lost her mind. She cried for 3 years. He said, I'd come home from work. It was like coming home to a morgue. Eula, in the middle of the night, I'd reach over her side of the bed. She's out of the bed. She's crying. She's in the living room. And he said, "Sister, you can't believe what we went through with her." Almost, we had to change David's grave. We'd buried him in a family plot in a little town, and Eula couldn't bear to be separated. We had to move his grave to right close here to the house so Eula can visit it every day. One victim's family told me one time, he said, "They're on death row. Let me tell you what, we're on death row." This unbelievable suffering people plunged into. How did they ever pull out of it? How could they ever be healed? And as he began to share with me his own journey, he said, "Sister, I've always been a loving man. I've always been a kind man. I'm the kind of person, I'm going down the highway. If I see somebody, they pulled over, they're broken down, I'll stop. Middle of the night, doesn't matter." He said, and I could feel that hatred and that bitterness rising up in me. And I went, "No. They killed my son, but I'm not going to let them kill me. And if I would be like that, I would be changed. And I'm not going to let them change me." He taught me that what forgiveness means is that the love is so strong in us, we don't let the hate overcome it. Not once. It's not one act. He set his face to go down the road. He said people think forgiveness is weak, and this, Americans think it's weak, like you condoning what the person did. "Oh, you killed our son," like forgive and forget. Condone it, he said. Condone it. Every time David has a birthday, we lose him all over again. Condone it. He'd be 20, he'd be 25. He'd have our grandkids by now. Like Vicky, our daughter. Thank God they had a daughter. Thank God she had children. And it was the grandchildren that finally brought Eula back to life. And so I began to learn from him. I began to learn what forgiveness means. I began to learn. Then I go to murder victim support groups. And of course, I understood when people around the circle said, people stay away from us because they don't know what to do with our pain. So then I see murder victims' families are treated like pariah on one end of the spectrum, and then the death row inmate considered inhuman on the other end. And so then I'm stretched, and my journey begins with the victim's family, and then I'm with this man when they kill him, and I watch the protocol of death close up. Knew the crime, have always been horrified at the crime, and I still visit with that victim's family. But then I'm with this man, and we're in the death house, and the tiles are all polished, and the coffee pot's perking, and They have geraniums growing on the outside, and everybody's polite, and we're going to kill a human being tonight. And the associate wardens are coming in a three-piece suit, and the reporters and the people from the press, they're serving them sandwiches and refreshments, and the witnesses are coming in, and they're getting the papers ready for the witnesses to sign. Something's going to go on here tonight, and there's a bustle about it. There's a busyness about it. People are playing their role. And Pat, we could both see as the door would open, here was the electrician coming in to test the chair. The reason Tim Robbins changed to lethal injection in the movie was he said, I know that you've been with people who've been electrocuted, but people are turning to lethal injection like this is a humane way to kill a human being, and we need to head them off at the pass. Because if we'd show the electric chair, people like in Oregon or Washington State or wherever would say, oh, but we are not barbarian like those Southerners in Louisiana. We use lethal injection. That's humane. Did you know the second drug in the lethal cocktail to kill a human being is solely to paralyze them? So the few witnesses there do not see a human being writhe when they're thrown into cardiac arrest. And that's 12 people behind prison walls. That's how much a secret ritual this thing. We don't want to see the pain. We don't want to see blood. We don't want to see suffering. We want to say we're just putting people to sleep. And then you have people like Justice Scalia saying an enviable death by lethal injection in comparison to what they did to their victim. What does that mean? So we need to up the ante, cause more pain, a death for a death in the same way. Let's stab this person then 17 times. Since when have we made our mode of behavior that we will imitate, the criminal code of behavior, that we will match them? They killed, so now we kill them. And would that we could cause them more pain in the killing. What happens to us? That's where the ball is in the court now morally. It's more now the reflection is coming back on us. What does it do to us to kill human beings in this way? And then to say to our children, and this is the way we teach, that this is what you do when somebody does a mortal offense against you. You legalize it, but it's okay to kill them. Do we need a master's program like we have at the School of Conflict Resolution? Do we need centers all around this nation to learn to try to solve our conflicts and our disputes by nonviolent means, by people talking, by restorative justice, by getting to the roots of violence and not imitating it? And I applaud this school, and I applaud you, Cheney, and I applaud you, Tim, and the people who have made this program come into being in this school, and the students and the people who teach it, because you are one of the first in our nation to begin to see that we have to take another path. The death penalty is a paradigm for what's going on in Iraq. When people hurt you, when they kill you, what you do is you go kill them. And it just extends in ripples across the world. Look where it is. As far as I know, you are the only place in the United States that symbolically is showing the Iraqi people who are being killed along with the Americans being killed with the flags that you have. It's the only place where symbolically you can see what's happening. When I accompanied Pat and I looked at death close up and watched as they killed him, it changes your soul forever, because it's like a baptism of fire, because he did look at my face, and mine was the last face he saw before they put a mask over his face to protect the witnesses from seeing when 1,900 volts was going to be pulsed through his body and kill him. And I walked out of that execution chamber that night, not knowing, not fully realizing I had been changed forever, threw up, middle of the night, and my mission was born then. I went, the people are never going to see this. It's a secret ritual. The polls in Louisiana in 1984, 80% people supported the death penalty, but it's not a reflected opinion. That's not our deep souls. That's our surface souls. So I had been a witness, so I had to tell the story, and so I began. Before the book, little bitty groups of people. It's humbling to remember how it started. Like St. Christopher's nursing home after lunch, this announcement, Who wants to hear the death penalty, none? 3 people. We went in this little parlor. I'll start talking, 10 minutes, 2 of them are gone. Gone. And this one lady was listening. I had my eyes locked like, lady, don't leave me. You're it. You're it. And then Dennis Caleb taught sociology at Loyola University in the poor kids' captive audience. And I go to them and I start, and they taught me how you take people through the journey and you take them over to the victim's side as well, to stand there in that outrage, stand there, own it. It's morally righteous to feel outrage. We should feel outrage when innocent human beings are ripped out of life. It's what are we going to do with the outrage that we have to work out as a society. So facile to say, oh yeah. And then now, where we are now, 30 years, folks, we've been putting the death penalty into practice. Oregon's not really serious about the death penalty. You have a few people, but you don't really do it. We really do it in the South. You want to look at the practitioners? 85% of all executions happen in the 10 southern states that practice slavery. And what does that tell us? It's all poor people, and overwhelmingly it's people who kill white people. Supreme Court said you're supposed to kill only the worst of the worst crime. Well, it seems like the opening requirement is who'd you kill, because when you kill people of color, 50% of all homicides in this country, you almost never go for the death penalty for the killing of a person of color, a Latino kid in Los Angeles, a Native American kid, an African American person. Even if we wanted to, we didn't have a way to apply the death penalty. And the theory of it, oh yeah, let me tell you, politicians run like they got these designer death penalties. Like Romney in Massachusetts who's running on that, saying, I'm going to have a designer death penalty in Massachusetts. We're only going to do it right. We're not going to have any mistakes. Impossible to do. The working title of Death of Innocence was Impossible Burden, because finally my heart goes out to the jurors, just human beings like us, and you go behind those closed doors now, and you just kind of sort out what we presented to you and tell me now, do you think your fellow citizen ought to live or ought to die? And you carry that in your soul the rest of your life, that you've sentenced someone to death. How do they feel now with 123 wrongfully convicted people who've come off a death row? Say, hey, you made a mistake about me. They're going with what they know, what they hear. They don't know when a jailhouse informer is lying, like in the Joseph Odell story, the second story of my book, Steve Watson. Surprise witness, Virginia, just appears, didn't tell anybody he was coming. The prosecutors didn't let defense know. And there he was, and he points to Joe there in the courtroom, and all the evidence had been circumstantial, and he points and said, Joe, you confessed to me that you killed Helen Shortner. And he rises up, he goes, that's a lie. And order in the court and all that good stuff. And then Steve says, yeah, we were sitting in a cell, and Joe told me, yeah, this is how he killed her. And while I'm writing the book, Death of Innocence, took me 4 years. I think one of the reasons providentially it took me so long was there was an email one day from Steve Watson. He said, please call me. I phoned him up, and he says, sister, I hear you writing about Joe. I said, yeah, Steve, I am. He said, sister, I lied. I lied, and they killed him. He died, and now I've retired, and I'm sitting in my living room, and I keep seeing Joe's face. What do I do now? The jury didn't know he was lying. How are they going to know? Here's a man, the prosecution's putting him up. They think, I mean, we have really a basic faith in our court system. That we think we can arrive at the truth and make a decision, even about whether some people ought to live and some people ought to die. We can't handle it. We got to take death off the table and just say we can't handle it. And let's be people for life. And let's take all those resources. New York, 180 million when they had 9 years of the death penalty that George Pataki, good Catholic George Pataki, brought back to New York. $180 million they spent to have 4 people on death row, which are nothing but political trophies. We got to look into the political symbolism. This isn't about really trying to control crime or deter crime. That's not what's going on here. And let's take death off the table, and let's put all those resources, and don't divide this into, well, now she's moving over to the practical issue, the money. The moral issues are over here about whether or not you ought to do it and all. And over here we got the practical. No. Money, Martin Luther King used to say the most moral document you'll ever look at is a budget. $1.2 trillion used in making bombs and military and the use of violence. And meanwhile, we cut affordable housing, and they're about to demolish 5,000 units of affordable housing in New Orleans, while so much is going into our military. And so we build prisons, and so we execute people, and we have this huge budget to have the machinery of death in place in our state, even when we don't even use it. And we got at-risk kids, and we got people without health care, and we got the needs of our public schools. We got kids addicted to drugs and no place to go to be able to break that addiction. You know what I always write in books? Choose life. We need to choose life. People of Oregon really need to do this. If the young people sitting in this room began to write letters to your legislators and go visit them, you could turn this thing around, because it's not deep inside your souls to keep doing this. You don't really practice it. You're that close. And in fact, the country is beginning to shut it down. Executions are down, the lowest they've been since we put it back. Death sentences are down. Let's take it away. Let's take it off the table. Say we can't handle death. We can barely get the potholes filled to collect taxes right. Let's take death off the table. We don't have to do it. So I'll be with you afterwards to sign books for you as long as you want to be here. And so we also have these little envelopes to help us with the moratorium campaign. It's to educate the public. It's to get the play project out there. Anything you can do to join, be a member. And so let me stop, and we can have some conversation together. Okay?
Say thanks.
Okay. How much time we got?
We've got as much time as people want.
Okay.
And as much time as you want.
Well,
we'll
let's
go maybe for 10 minutes or so.
Yeah. Okay. Because people in Oregon talk fast. You had your hand up. You were ready.
Sister Helen, I researched a case a few years ago. Perhaps you remember that there was a man who was being held in Lane County here on burglary charges, and then he invited Father Tim to come. And in the meantime, this man, Conway Hale, was charged with murder along with a guy named John Sussbauer. Conway Hale asked Father Macias to come and do sacrament of reconciliation with him, and then apparently that was taken to Lane County Jail. Yeah. That became a big brouhaha. The outcome of that was that John Sussbauer cut a deal with the district attorney here, and that Conway Hale is on death row. I've done a lot of research in this case in the interest of writing a screenplay about it. And basically, Sussbauer, as far as I can tell, was the primary, but that's the way the deals get cut. So, is there a restorative justice project even happening here where people who are on death row at least can have, parity with the other people that are involved in the crime, or at least looking to see whether or not they are truly guilty of their crime or something going on?
Is, in Oregon, is there restorative justice for... Let's hear about the people who are working with it here.
Safety and Justice is meeting tomorrow at the Campbell Senior Center. It is a program along that line.
Safety and Justice?
Safety and Justice.
And where's the meeting?
Campbell Senior Center at 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock.
Campbell Senior Center at 10 o'clock.
Is there a website?
A website?
Google it.
Google get it.
How would they Google? Safety and Justice.
It's a partnership for safety and justice. They're meeting at 10 o'clock tomorrow from 10 to 12 with legislators from this area.
Good.
There are about 6 legislators who have committed to come to this. It should be a very interesting meeting. I want to invite anybody in the area of prison reform and prison sentencing, particularly in Measure 11.
Partnership in safety and justice.
Thank you. Okay, someone else? Yes.
Thank you for coming, sister. Can you say anything in general about conversion of the criminals? That was well presented in the movie. But can you say anything in general about what people go through?
I will say this.
When the movie came out, and I went with Tim to the Berlin Film Festival, there were journalists from all over the world there. And one of the journalists said, Mr. Robbins, I think you have an interesting theology in this film that's at work here. He said, you know, if Matt Poncelet, who's a composite character of the people in Dead Man Walking, if he had gotten a life sentence, I mean, you know, he didn't have death facing him, he wouldn't have come to, you know, take responsibility and have that change of soul that he had. He said, so in a way, you're really saying when you give people the death penalty, they straighten up, come to responsibility, and it actually facilitates. So I was sitting up there, and I looked at Tim. I thought, wow, let's see how he handles this one, you know. And so Tim right away said, sir, you really don't know, do you, that if the person had had a life sentence and had reflected on what he had done, that maybe he would have come to a change of heart. And right away the journalist said, you're right, I really don't know that. And Tim said to him, what changed Matthew Poncelet? Was it the threat of death, or was it for the first time in his life he met unconditional love? And actually, I want to tell you, when you read Dead Man Walking, the second person I was with, Pat Saunier the first, was very, very remorseful about what had happened. You'll read his story there. The second one, Robert Willie, was a tough guy. He had been a little outlaw. It was his identity to be tough. And he was giving these interviews to journalists saying, the electric chair don't scare me, man. And he had a swastika tattooed. He had belonged to the Aryan supremacy group in the Marion Penitentiary. And he walked to the electric chair with a little bounce in his step, and he winked at me from the electric chair. I only had him for 2 months. It was very quick, and we had a lot of work to do in 2 months. And he was racist, I hate niggers, I mean, you know, I'm going, oh, you know. And so if you look at the film, all those things, the tough parts were coming out from Robert Lee Willie. And so we were just talking, and I said, did you ever think of, you know, he couldn't even have compassion for the murder victims. The girl had been killed, her parents, because they wanted to see him executed. So then the outlaw thing just kicks in, and he goes, they're their own worst enemy. Vernon Harvey, he needs to get off it, man. He said he's his own worst enemy. He needs to let it go. I said, you were going to give advice to the person whose, you know, their daughter was killed. And he goes, well, fine, he said, well, I really hope my death will give him some peace. I really do. I said, that would be a great thing to say for your last words, Robert. I didn't know what he was going to do. I didn't know if he was going to curse everybody out. I didn't know. When he said, I hope my death gives them peace, then that was a loving wish. And that was touch and go. So death itself is not what changes people. When you have an identity and you've lived a tough life and now they're coming after you, you know, self-protection can, and then that identity just gets strengthened. Because in order to feel remorse, you have to leave self behind completely, enter into the pain of another, and then come before them and say, I am so sorry for what you were suffering, which I feel you're suffering. And sometimes when people have been abused, as he had been, and this tough outlaw, he didn't feel their pain. And death isn't going to change that. Up in the ante and saying, we're going to kill you. You cause pain, that isn't what really affected him. And so actually, many people say, well, at least if they have the death penalty, they're going to get their soul straight with God, and then the religion thing comes in there, where chaplains have actually, on death rows, said, say yes to your death, and you'll be able to pay for your sins, and you'll be able to meet God. Religion is all through this thing. Born again Christian warden, holds their hands, prays with them, then nods to the executioner to kill them. We have religious paintings in the death house in Louisiana. The last thing a person sees before they walk through the steel metal door into the execution chamber is Elijah going up in a fiery chariot. That's what they're about to do, getting ready to go to God. It's an amazing thing. You know, really people are going to look back on these times and go, whoa, this is really one of the reasons I wrote Dead Man Walking was I said, this is for history, because later people are going to look and say, isn't that amazing what we did? And what we did in the name of religion, what we did in the name of God, what we did in the name of justice. Yes.
I'd like to share a personal story, which I wasn't prepared to share when I came in here, but what you said has really made me want to do this. I volunteer for restorative justice. I think I'm a compassionate, caring person. But one of my students was Brooke Wilberger, who people in this name might recognize the name. I had her as an 8th grader, and she was murdered a few years ago. I taught her siblings, and when this person was charged with the crime and brought forth, I saw a side of me come out. I thought I was against capital punishment, and I heard myself say to people, I could pull the trigger and kill this guy. Could you tell me what to do with that kind of feeling? I don't see myself that way, but all of a sudden that was a personal connection with someone I know and love being killed.
Sure. And just reflecting on it yourself, I could pull the trigger. What emotion does that express for you?
I'm angry.
Yeah.
We talked about that today. That was so helpful.
Yeah. Because it's really hard to feel compassion for him. It killed that beautiful person whom you knew. And so that's the expression of that outrage. I could pull the trigger. Now, you hear yourself saying the words, and you know what you feel, and then where do you go with that? Is it still the way you feel? Is it your will? Is it what you would intend? Okay, here, we're going to bring you in. You get a chance. Would you do it?
Yeah. I mean, you know, your expression, this is just pure outrage because you knew her.
I tell you, when I'm signing books, amazing things happen over these books when people come to get their books signed. You know the Central Park jogger? The one? She came to get a book one time, leaned over. I'm the woman who was in the park when the kids, they left me for dead now. People, this woman in Indiana where I just was, she leans over. She talks about her little cousin, or this crazy man went in and bludgeoned her to death, killed their little dog, killed her. I mean, things happen to people that are just unspeakably terrible. So we have a lot of violence erupting, and people are hurting. We need to really, what do we do for victims of violence in Oregon? Do we have strong groups of counseling and support and community and accompaniment to help people who fall apart, break apart, lose their jobs, to get divorces? Over 70% of parents who lose their kids, that whatever fault lines are in the marriage, they get divorced. We need community strengthening, real help for victims' families. Does it exist in Oregon? Are there people here who work with it? Yes.
I just would want to add that the same group is trying, it used to be the Western Prison Project. You may have heard of that. Mm-hmm. And they're expanding the name, and they want to work with victims and their families as well. They want it to be more comprehensive in that way. So they're saying we need to do this.
Yes.
I'm not aware of what's going on now for victims' families.
Is anybody aware of what goes on for victims' families? Yeah, in the back there.
Well, I don't know. I just work for Lane County Mental Health, which is all the poor population who have serious psychiatric disorders. So, we have over 1,000 clients coming in who are poor, getting help, and we have various trauma projects going on in the community with people from all walks of life working on that.
Yeah, okay. Rita? Speak up so everybody can hear you. Stand up. She's used to standing up.
I'm not aware of any good gender reconciliation programs here. I don't think that they exist. I think there are good victim services on the sort of county by county level. But I wanted to share, because it goes along with this. I worked in Texas. I did death penalty work in Texas. So I know Sister Helen.
Kind of turn around and face people so they can hear you better.
Awesome.
You're ratcheting you around there.
But I had a client who was convicted, sentenced to death, murdered a young woman, and he, in Texas, this is Texas, death penalty capital of the world, more executions than every other state combined, and there was a man that worked in the prisons with a victim offender reconciliation program, and the victim's mother, in this case, went to him and said, I need closure on this. I need to meet the guy who killed my daughter. And he said, oh, yeah, we can't do that. You know, we don't do it on death row people. And she insisted. And so he went up through the chain of command and finally got permission to do it. And I think it was the first and maybe the only, I'm not really sure whether Texas has continued doing this, but she was the first victim family member of an inmate sentenced to death in Texas anyway, who actually sat down with my client, sat across from him. I didn't get to be there because that would interfere with the process, and I understood that, but I did screen the letters that went back and forth before this happened. But she got to say to him, you killed my daughter. And he got to say, I'm sorry. And I think that is more than anything. The work that Sister Helen does is she builds the ability to make that happen. You know, she builds that. She works with victim family members, and she makes it so that that can happen. And I think that him saying I'm sorry to her face to face, and she was not easy on him. She screamed at him, she yelled at him, she cried, he cried. You know, it's pretty awful for him. But she, when he was executed, she had a completely different kind of peace than most victim family members that I've known of, who think they're going to get peace after the execution, and really all they get is, oh, now what? Now who do I have left to be angry at?
There is, I just want to add one little thing. There is some documentation around, and I have lost track of the video on exactly that kind of thing, and I will make a commitment. It's been in the back of my mind for a couple of years to track that down. And if you want to email me, and I hesitate to say this in such a large group, but if you want to email me, I will get you that name if I can, because it's a remarkable document on an experience in a murder situation.
Yeah.
Do you know that name?
I know of it, yeah.
So we'll track it down, and if you're interested in
What's your email address, Tim?
Tim.
Write it on the board. Here's Tim's email address, everybody. Valentine's Day is coming up. Nice handwriting.
Are there any others?
Yes.
I was wondering if you ever get the chance to work with the families of the offender?
Oh, yeah.
If so, what sort of, what sort of emotions and what sort of aspects do you find talking with that sort of angle?
Victims, the family of the offender. Your son or your brother is going to be executed by the state. Some of them move out of town and don't let. When Willie Celestine, the third person I was with, his sister moved to Texas, didn't tell anybody she had a brother on death row. The children of people on death row, Pat Saunier's daughter Star had to change schools. Kids called her, the kid, her daddy was a murderer. He's going to get the electric chair. Their little sing-song to each other, the cruelty, An aunt asked Star if she wanted to take ballet lessons, and she said no, she wanted to take karate. Mrs. Saunier couldn't even go into the town. She could overhear people when she went to the grocery store saying, there she is, that white trash woman. Her sons murdered the Bourque and the LeBlanc children. People cutting up dead animals, throwing them on her front porch. how do you protect a family from the hatred of the community, the shame that someone in your family. Bud Welch's daughter Julie was killed in the Oklahoma City bombing, finally went to see Bill McVeigh. And Bud Welch will say, Julie, I will tell Julie's story all over the world of my beautiful daughter, and that she died that day helping someone get their Social Security translated from Spanish into English. What can Bill McVeigh do? He can't even tell people who he is. And so to think we can corral the hate like into a laser beam just to the one person we're killing, like you're dropping a big drop of red dye in a bowl of water and you say, don't spread. And these families, it's shame. I've been to the funerals where it is shame. Their loved one has been, they try to avoid journalists or reporters or press. They come in. And Robert Willie, his mother faints when she sees him in the coffin. And the little son's, there she is on the floor near her son's coffin. He's going, wake up, Mommy, wake up, Mommy. What happens to them? What can hate do for families? Just imagine, just take it through. And so again, do we heal victims' families or do we multiply victims' families? Where does the hatred and where does the violence end? Yes, sir.
Example I've seen of restorative justice was what happened in Pennsylvania with
Yeah,
the
the Amish.
That was just, not the Amish, that was just
Yeah.
amazing. Have you had any?
I mean, you know what? You know the Amish when the little girls were killed, and I was in the community right down the road from where that happened. Everybody, of course, was talking about it, and the elders, you know, because the Quakers, the Amish, prepare the bodies for, you know, the wake and the funeral, and had washed the bodies of the little girls and dressed them, and the elders saying, we must not return the evil. I mean, they were so clear to us. And I mean, you want to talk about shock and awe in a nonviolent, loving way. And in a way, you know, people didn't know what to do with that. You know, sometimes we dismiss people when they choose the path of forgiveness, and we say, well, they're in their grief, or, you know, those Amish, they always were way out. I mean, you know, they're like not real people and all. But I think that their witness is still reverberating across this country, that they chose that they would not imitate the evil, and they visited the family of the man, you know, who had done this. And when people were sending money into them to help them in their community, they shared half of it with the mother of the young man who had killed their children.
I've dealt with the death of a son, and I have my son who just turned 21 in prison, 5 years on an assault 3 charge here in Lane County. The newspaper took him all the way. Everything that was done was illegal. He's right now, just turned 21, just picture my son, a straight A college student. His sunlight right now is a murderer. But he killed a sex offender, so he's not such a bad guy. The legal community has got to change. Our attorney would not let us contact the victim. My son was in a car accident and he very seriously injured a woman. No, can we contact her? No. Well, during the trial, she was there, of course. And after the trial, I went over and I gave her a hug and told her how much we had been praying for her healing and her recovery. She returned my hug, and it was the most healing thing. I sent her some flowers. She sent me back a beautiful card that I sent to my son in prison saying, I just wish your son and I had met in a different way. And I so appreciate you reaching out to me. I could have done it months before, but the attorneys say, no, you can't, don't get in touch with the victim. It really is ingrained in the legal system, and that needs to change.
Okay, folks, I think we're going to stop. And just know, when you get the books, you help the moratorium campaign, you can get both of the paperbacks for $25, Death of Innocence and Dead Man Walking. We have some $100 books signed by Susan Sarandon, Tim, and me, and that's a fundraiser. and sign the moratorium petition, and we're going to get those names into all the Oregon people working to get the death penalty out, and sign the Furukawa paper to get justice in Japan, and have a great evening, and it was great to be with you. Going to sign the books in here.
Thanks everyone for coming.